My guest today is a football coach from the area. He's been at several colleges. We talk about him nerding out about walking, working out, his early high school career playing football and wrestling, getting his first coaching job, moving from different schools, working with different head coaches, being a strength trainer for several years, strength and conditioning coach. And then at one of his stops simultaneously, he was a defensive line coach, the head wrestling coach, and he taught classes at college. So that was an impressive display there when he talked about that. He's a great guy, and I think this is a great podcast for you all to listen to. Thanks as always to Fort Meigs CrossFit. They allowed me to record out of the Fort Meigs CrossFit studios here. They have classes 7 days a week for any skill level, from beginner to if you do this every day. They're here for you. Check out everything they have to offer at fortmeigscrossfit.com. Again, I appreciate everything they have done for me here. So without further ado, here's my guest.
I'm Mike Ward, and this is the Nerdball podcast.
This is the Nerdball podcast with Lorenzo Melcher.
Perfect. Coach Ward, thanks for coming on the podcast today.
No problem.
I've only known you a few years, but I know you've recruited a lot of kids, but I do remember you from when I was in high school. You worked at BG at the time, and you recruited me. The first question I always ask people is, what is something you've been nerding out about lately? Something you're really into, books, movies, TV shows, something that gets you away from work. Something that's a hobby of yours. It could be something you've been doing for a long time, or something you just started. Is there something that you have right now that's got you going?
I think my release is working out.
Yeah.
And when the weather breaks, walking.
Okay.
We got a year-old golden doodle that I take on walks.
Oh.
So I like to relieve stress by working out. Not nearly what I used to, but staying active and then getting outside whenever I can.
Yeah. Is you just like to walk around the neighborhood? Do you guys go to parks or anything?
We have a trail there in White House, but it's usually through the neighborhood. Really quiet. And we don't have to deal with traffic much at all, so
Yeah.
it's very relaxing.
Is there a time of day that you like to go? Because I know my dad likes to walk. He's retired. He has weird hours. I think he goes for walks at like 2 a.m. But I didn't know if there was like a time that you like better than others to.
With my schedule, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, that's out.
Mm-hmm.
So Wednesday, as soon as I get home,
Okay.
and then on Saturday and Sunday, it just depends on what the schedule is. If I'm doing a Nerdball podcast, it kind of kicks it back a little bit.
Sure.
So.
Well, thanks for moving your walk back for me. Have you always been that way? As far as like even when you were younger, you like to work out?
Yeah,
like to go
I guess it started when I was at BGSU as the strength coach.
Okay.
I spent from 5 a.m. till 7 p.m. in the weight room.
Yeah.
And at lunchtime, I would shut down. I'd lock the door for an hour, and I would just go.
Okay.
And go out and run. At that time, I was a big time runner. So just to get out of the building and get away, and I guess that's when it started. So I would do that every day at lunchtime, and then I did that like crazy on the weekend. On the the Slippery Elm bike trail down there. We had a big chocolate lab at that time. I would take him out on the bike trail every Saturday and Sunday, and every day off just to go.
Yeah, yeah. Are you from around this area?
I'm from Mansfield originally, which is from here about an hour and 45 minutes. So
Okay.
So we're an hour north of Columbus, an hour south of Cleveland, right off of 71.
Okay.
Is where I'm from originally.
Okay. And we'll pretty much go from the beginning of. I'm very interested in all your stops because you've made different stops at different colleges, and that interests me a lot. But I do want to start you're a football coach now at Perrysburg. I'm assuming you played football in high school. What position did you play in high school?
In high school, I was offensive center and was a linebacker.
Yeah. Did you play offensive line like from a little kid up until high school?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was a fat little kid.
I hated offensive line until probably my sophomore year in high school, and I played it from when I was 8 to 18, and I did not like it at all. And I try to tell kids. I even had a conversation with a seventh grade. He's going to be a seventh grader next year. He's like, I don't know if I want to play because I don't want to play the offensive line. I go and I try to tell him, but he's not an offensive lineman now. But as a sixth grader, there's weight restrictions, right? So I was like, you don't have to play. You can be a tight end or you can be a linebacker. That's what you want to do. But I told him, I always tell kids, I didn't like it either. But then I try to tell them, when I started liking it is when I understood it, what my job was, what I did. Were you like that too? Because every kid wants to catch the ball.
Right? So I tried to excel on defense then.
Okay.
So I would play as much on defense and as little as possible on offense. But you know how it is in high school, smaller high schools. You were going both ways.
Yeah.
And I made the mistake then, my sophomore year of playing center, and ended up beating out a senior, and so I started at center. So I was locked in as a center the next 3 years, and that is the most god awful position there is in the world. To have to snap the ball between your legs and block at the same time against good players.
Yeah.
It's damn near impossible.
It's such a quick thing, and then I know our defense does it quite a bit. Is just moving pre-snap, because as a high school kid, you're like, all right, this is who I'm going to block, and then right before you snap it, they shift. They're like, oh no, I'm panicking. Who am I supposed to block now?
Yeah. And back in the day when I was doing that, the odd defense was huge, and they would take their quickest guy and put that nose guard in. And you talk about a nightmare. Oh my God, I hated it. Absolutely hated it.
When you were playing in high school, did you think like, hey, I want to keep playing in college, or were you just like content with playing in high school?
No, I knew I wanted to play.
Yeah.
My father was a teacher, was a coach. My brother excelled, older brother. So I knew I wanted to go on in college and football or wrestle, and it boiled down to really football.
So you wrestled and did football in high school. So you knew, like you said, you just wanted to compete at the next level. Did you care like what level that was, or you just wanted to go play in college?
Well, you know how the recruiting process is, and obviously it's changed quite a bit. But yeah, I wanted to go as big as I possibly could. Then I started visiting schools, and I started realizing that, wow, your Division II, your Division III footballs are way better than what you realize as a high school player.
Yeah.
And I was an undersized offensive lineman, and was a step too slow or two to play linebacker at the Division I level. So I started exploring Division II schools, and at that time, there was only 2 Division II schools in the state of Ohio.
Oh, wow.
And that was Ashland and then Central State. And, Central State was historically an all-black school. Weren't going to take a chubby white kid from Lexington High School. So, and Ashland was roughly 20 minutes away from where I grew up. So I wanted to get away from home a little bit.
Yeah.
So that I could grow up and get away. I didn't want to go too far. So I ended up at a small school in Kentucky, Georgetown College. And at the time, they were in the same conference as Ashland. It was called the Hoosier Buckeye Conference. And it was Ashland, it was Georgetown College, it was Valparaiso, it was Butler University, Indianapolis, but at the time it was Indiana Central. Franklin College, Evansville had football, Division II football at the time. Kentucky Wesleyan had Division II. It was a neat little 8-team conference, and it was a great experience.
So do you think what led you to go down there is just like, obviously playing college football, but like you said, just I want to get away a little bit? Because I know there's some kids who that's one of their first things, like, I don't care where I'm going. I just I know I don't want to be here.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, I looked at Baldwin Wallace. I looked at Heidelberg. I looked at Muskegon. I really looked at Mount Union. I actually visited Mount Union twice and was really thinking about going there. Ohio Wesleyan. I had a buddy that was going to Ohio Wesleyan. Loved it down there. And at the time, it was all 16 millimeter film. So you would send your film out. It was crazy. They would bust the film. They would load your container of reels of film on a bus. And I had film at my high school coach was a Morehead State grad. I had film at Morehead State and then had it at Murray State.
Yeah.
And the offensive coordinator at Murray State at the time got the Georgetown College job and had seen my film, saw where I was from. And he was from Shelby, Ohio, Shelby High School originally. So he reached out to my dad and, because hell, this was way before cell phone times. And that was the contact to Georgetown College.
Okay.
And it was kind of a crazy the way it happened.
Yes.
I went down there obviously because of the relationship with the head coach, and we went 7-3 that first year, and then he took the offensive coordinator job at the University of Cincinnati. So he was out the door
in 1 year
and left us all hanging. Yeah. Oh yeah. It was quite the experience.
Well, when you went to college, did you know like what you wanted to study at all?
Yeah, because of where I chose to go to school, I knew I wanted to get into education. I wanted to be a teacher and a coach, so I was going to be a health and PE major and get a secondary teaching certificate, and I wanted to get a teaching minor, so I got at the time it was a political science minor, which now is integrated social studies. So I had a teaching certificate in all those areas.
Yeah. So you said you went 7-3. How much did you play? Or right?
It was crazy because I went down there as a linebacker. I was recruited as a linebacker, and I was working out with the high school, and I thought at the time I was in the best shape of my life, ready to go. But the week before camp, we were doing bounds on the football field, on the grass football field. And I tore the arch or the plantar fascia in my foot, and it just swelled up. I couldn't walk, and the foot was huge. And this was like 4 days before I went down to camp. So I was supposed to be on crutches. So I'm like, okay, now what the hell do I do? So I went down there and just really gutted it out. And at that time, it was different. We had the reporting day was different. You had to run a 40-yard dash.
So you're doing all this with a hurt foot?
You had to bench press max. There was one. I'm sorry. There was 2 agility runs. We did a T run, and then we did the pro agility.
Okay.
And then at the very end, you had to run a mile, and of course I was doing this on a torn arch, and I pulled my hamstring on the 40-yard dash because I was favoring the one leg so bad. So I pulled my hamstring, still ran the agilities, still did the bench press, still ran the mile. Yeah. All right. And so we get equipment and they get your jersey and all this stuff, and by the time we got our equipment, they had looked at all the test results and they just showed me to the locker room section where the offensive linemen were at. So I quickly got moved from linebacker to offensive line right away. And it was it's a freak thing the way it happened because I practiced. They would tape it, and a good friend of mine was a grad assistant. I ended up being a good friend of mine. Was a grad assistant at the time. He was the D-line coach, and he also was the trainer. So he would he goes, oh, I know this arts training technique. And he was basically almost cutting off the circulation in my foot. And I'd go out and practice and come back in. And it took a long time for it to heal well. I was struggling to play offensive guard.
Yeah.
So they moved me to tackle.
Oh,
and this is the week before the first game.
Yeah.
And the starting tackle tears his ACL in practice. So first game of the season, I'm starting at offensive tackle.
As a freshman.
I went from linebacker that couldn't run for shit to starting offensive tackle, and the rest is history.
Yeah. Did you stay at that position the rest of the time?
No, just that year.
Yeah.
And then I moved to offensive guard and started there the next 3 years.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Wow, that's insane. I can't imagine like having to tell a parent nowadays like, yep, he tore his plantar fascia and but he's still practicing and doing everything.
And at that time,
Yeah.
you know, obviously there were rules and regulations, but for training camp, there wasn't. So whatever money you had in your budget, you could go as long as you want in training camp. So we went 2 weeks, 3 weeks.
Yeah.
I lost track of how long it was.
Yeah,
I mean, we would practice Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, scrimmage on Saturday, and Sunday you did nothing.
Yeah.
But sleep. I'll never forget the first Sunday. I woke up at like 1 o'clock in the afternoon.
Yeah.
And it was like, wow, boy, did I need that, you know.
Wow.
And you know, like I said, we did that for 3 consecutive weeks.
Yeah.
And then school started.
And it doesn't get any easier. Now you have to, not physically, but now mentally, you got to go through all this schooling and then go to practice. Yeah, that's a lot. When you were done with school, did you have a plan as you're finishing college? Did you have a plan? Like,
you know, I played, and then I stayed right on. Had to do my student teaching, which was a whole semester. So, you know, they don't advertise that in education. You know, degree in 4 years. Yeah, you get your degree, but you have to get your teaching certificate. So I stayed on and was a student coach while I did my student teaching. So I was student teaching at a junior high, and then I would come back and coach at the college.
Okay.
And then started in grad school right away in January. So I got my teaching certificate in December, stayed on, was offered a grad assistant position right there, and got my master's really in a year.
Oh, wow.
You know, so if I wouldn't have done that, I probably wouldn't have coached college. And, you know, I would have, you know, I interviewed for a couple high school jobs that, you know, but I was having a ball coaching college.
Yeah.
And it was neat. It was kind of a unique situation because we, you know, a smaller school at the time, there was probably 1,500 students, and we had 3 grad assistants, and we were all resident directors of a dorm.
Oh.
So we had an apartment in the basement of the dorm, the first level of the dorm. You were in charge of the dorm. You got all your meals for free. You got housing was free.
Yeah.
Your schooling was paid for, and you didn't get a stipend if your schooling was paid for.
Okay.
If you were done with school, you made roughly $550, $600 a month.
Yeah.
And you had no expenses.
Yeah.
So I was having the time of
Yeah.
my life.
Why would you move on from that?
Oh,
Yeah.
I know.
So how long did you get a job with your college after you were done with everything?
I was a grad assistant spring, the following fall during the season, through the spring again, and then the middle of July, I was offered a job at the University of Findlay.
Oh, really?
At
Okay.
Findlay College at the time.
Yeah.
The 2 other grad assistants at the time had come down from Findlay College, and they went back, and the guy I replaced at Findlay took a grad assistant job at the University of Georgia and didn't take it until the middle of the summer. So here it was after the 4th of July. It was probably the second week in July that I get that job. So I came back to Ohio. I needed to get out. I'd spent 6 years there.
Yeah.
I needed to get back to Ohio, and Ohio high school football versus Kentucky high school football is night and day. It's night and day, and it's just the importance of it, and so I was fired up to get back to Ohio, where I was from, and Findlay was roughly an hour from home, so it was neat. It was a good move.
What position did you get hired for at Findlay?
I started out as the defensive line coach.
Okay.
And also a head wrestling coach.
Oh, really?
And a instructor in the health and phys ed department.
Okay.
So, and that was crazy because I would recruit for football and recruit for wrestling at the same time. Go into school, see the football coach, see the wrestling coach, and I did that for 4 years. And this is when the strength and conditioning was really coming into play, and the weight room was off of the wrestling room, so I was also the strength coach because I would unlock the weight room while I'm running wrestling practice. So you had football players lifting, and I'm running wrestling practice, and then I was teaching, 3 classes a semester, and it was unique. I did that for 4 years, and then we built a weight facility, a new building, and I was able to design a weight facility in that building. And I talked the athletic director into hiring my assistant wrestling coach to be the head coach, and he took them,
nice.
And did a phenomenal job. I mean, just took the ball and ran with it, and then we built this brand new weight facility, which then I ran that, which was really cool, and that's how I got into the strength and conditioning background. At that point, I did that for another 2 years, and I had to make a decision what I was going to do. I wanted to become a better football coach, and I also wanted to become a better strength coach, but I couldn't do both the way I wanted to.
Yeah.
And I got my certification as a strength and conditioning specialist, and I ended up interviewing and getting the job at Bowling Green as the strength and conditioning coach. So I did that. I did that for 9 years. For 8 years. I'm sorry, 8 years.
Going back to when you first started at Findlay, I mean, I would think just being a football coach is hard, but then being not just an assistant wrestling coach, the head wrestling coach, and teaching classes. How did you manage all that? Because it just seems like so much that for one person to do when that's clearly could probably be 3 different people doing those 3.
It was you would have I had 2 classes on Tuesday, Thursday, like maybe one on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then you spent the rest of the time either prepping for football or prepping for wrestling practice, and recruiting, scheduling, things like obviously in the wrestling I had to hire a good assistant coach, and after the first year I was able to hire this guy who really came in and did a great job.
The one who ended up being
it ended up being John Jeffire.
Okay.
And his father, John at the time, John wrestled at St. Lawrence University in New York, and was a great Division III All-American wrestler, and was teaching English at Heidelberg at the time, and kind of was like an adjunct part-time professor. He was driving from Findlay to Tiffin every day to teach English. And his father owned the Euler Pizza Pub, which was the place to go in Findlay at the time to drink beer and eat pizza and talk sports. It was a great sports bar.
Yeah.
And the owner was a phenomenal guy from Detroit. Was a hockey nut. And introduced me to his son, and it was a no brainer, and
Yeah.
we were able to get him hired, and then like once the plans rolled out for this new facility, it was a no brainer, and it worked out best for both of us.
Yeah. Well, I'd imagine that felt like a lot of weight lifted off you. You're leaving the wrestling, but it's going to be in good hands. That's
Yeah.
okay.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Oh, that was.
Yeah.
The transition was awesome.
Yeah.
And because then I saw all those kids in the weight room.
Yeah.
And like I said, at that time, strength and conditioning was just coming in. Obviously the football lifted, but then the basketball, and then the wrestling, and then the track, and all those programs at the time just imploded at Findlay. I mean, the track program won the indoor nationals. The wrestling won the national championship. Basketball ended up winning the national championship.
Wow.
We did it in football. So it was a good time to be at Findlay.
Yeah. So after you leave Findlay, you say you get a job at BG, strength and conditioning coach, and that's for all sports for you, right?
Yeah. And that was at the time there were 22 sports.
Okay.
And they obviously have since dropped them, but yeah. And I was able to hire one grad assistant, and as long as it was a female.
Oh, really? Okay.
And so it was crazy, 22 sports.
Yeah.
And that was nuts. Knowing that football and hockey and basketballs were the first priority, and then soccer was phenomenal. Baseball was, it became too much.
Yeah.
It really became too much, which ended up really kind of getting me out of that profession. It was too much to do.
Well, yeah. It's a lot to do with just one sport, but to have all those sports there, and they're all different. You can't have how the football team's lifting. You can't have the girls soccer team lift that way. So it's all different. You're creating all these different programs. It would seem like a lot to handle.
Yeah, it was, and I was able then to hire an assistant who was in grad school there at BGSU.
Yeah.
And he was phenomenal, and then he in turn brought two student assistants on, but I was paying the assistant $5,000 a year.
Yeah.
Non-benefited. But just to get another person who was certified at the time to help with the program, and then he brought in two grad students in the exercise phys area, and it was we really got it going there at the end, but it just got to be too much.
Yeah. So you did that for 8 years, you said?
Yeah.
So after 8 years, then you were able to get a coaching job then after that?
Well, Rick Densdorf was the
Yeah.
defensive line coach at the time.
Okay.
And Rick moved out of coaching into the business world.
Okay.
And the defensive line job opened up. And the defensive coordinator at the time was Tim Beckman, good friend of mine. And as a matter of fact, I was one that really introduced Tim to Gary Blackney, who was the head coach. And Gary hired Tim as a secondary coach. Mm-hmm. And I think Tim had the corners or the safeties, and then Steve Spagnola, who's the defensive coordinator for the Kansas City Chiefs, coached the other two guys in the secondary. It was nuts, and it was a really good defensive staff. And Spagnola left, took a job in the World Football League with Jack Bicknell, and kind of went his way.
Yeah.
Tim took over the whole secondary. Rick, like I said, Rick got hired. Came, Rick was at Western Kentucky with the Horrorballs and all, and was a really good defensive line coach.
Yeah.
And he decided to move and coach, or not coach, but work in the business world. And Tim came to me. He said, "Hey," he goes, "Why don't you come and coach the defensive line?" And I thought about it, and I thought about it long and hard, and I said, "Yeah, let's do it." So I did that for the spring, and what was it? 4 games, 3 or 4 games into that season.
Yeah.
Gary Blackney resigned, so I'm like, okay, this was a great move,
Do you think if towards the end of your 8 years as a strength and conditioning coach, do you think if you really liked it and wanted to stay there, that you would even have moved to defensive line coach?
No, and I've got to be careful how I say this, but gender equity, the Title IX push was just coming into play, and the one assistant athletic director at the time came to me and said, we need to document the hours that you are spending with the men.
Oh.
And it's got to match up with what you're doing with the women.
Yeah.
And I couldn't, but I'm thinking to myself the whole time, that's impossible.
Yeah.
There's one person, it's impossible. And I knew they weren't going to hire a full-time assistant. I knew that wasn't going to happen.
Yeah.
And and I had enough, and that was what led to me accepting the football position. I mean, and don't get me wrong, we had Antonio Daniel, being able to work with Antonio Daniels, being able to work with Brian Holzinger, who won the Hobie Baker Award, the hockey Heisman, the baseball championships that we won when we were there, the soccer team, the track athletes that we had, had Todd Black, who's at Toledo St. John's now, ran in the Olympic trials in the 800 meter, to be able to work with those athletes was phenomenal. And I love that part of it, and, but it just, it was way too much.
Yeah.
Way too much.
When you said Blackney resigned, I always feel, and I'm assuming this is what it is, every staff is so connected to their head coach. When one does get fired or resign or take another position, every other person is like, okay, well, now what does that mean for me, right? I'm assuming that's what you guys felt when he just resigned. You're like, wait a minute, we're not even like in the summer. This is in the season. How does that affect the staff, or how does that affect you guys going forward?
First of all, as soon as the staff meeting was over, everybody went to their office and closed their door and called their wife and said, you're not going to friggin' believe it. And then they called all their buddies and said, hire me. It became, part of my language, it became a shit show.
Sure.
And you, again, the coaching profession at that level is crazy because it's the greatest team game there is, but in the coaching profession, you have to be such a self-promoter that you're doing everything to promote yourself and selling the team game. So it's as ass backwards as you can get, but in order to climb that ladder, what do you have to do?
Yeah.
You got to pound your chest and sell yourself, and that was as far from me as could be, and I to this day I still remember it, because I walked into Coach Blackney's office, sat down, and he had his head in both hands and was just was crying, and he just looked and raised up his head, and he just said that, he goes, this job is just is killing me. I can't do it anymore.
Yeah.
And at that time, Mid-American Conference football was really good, but we had to fundraise. Coach had to fundraise so much just to offset recruiting and equipment and everything, and just to make ends meet and to compete. And for years BGSU overachieved in football, and for those 8 seasons that Coach Blackney was the head coach, I mean, they won a ton of football games, and it just flat out wore him out.
Yeah.
And so it was a tough transition. But yeah, and the sad thing is we were really good on defense. And as a matter of fact, we led the Mid American Conference in defense that year and only won 2 football games.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. And that's how, when Coach Meyer got hired, that's why he retained Tim Beckman and actually retained at the time Tim Banks, who was one of our secondary coaches, who's now the defense coordinator at Tennessee, at the University of Tennessee. He retained Tim, and then I had to interview for the D-line job to stay on as the D-line coach. So it was a crazy transition.
Yeah, I mean, going through it just on a small scale at the high school level, when Coach Kriegel retired and then Dirk comes in, and I'm thinking, like, what does that mean for me? Like, what do I have to do? Or am I had all these plans, like, for the program, and then Coach Kriegel wanted to retire. I'm like, okay, well, now these plans aren't there. We got to figure out this, if I'm going to have a job right now. And I even talked to my wife, like, okay, if I don't get a job back, what does that mean for me? I mean, luckily for this coaching position, it's not right. We don't get paid a full-time wage to do this kind of stuff. We just do it because we love to do it. But that was the main. I love to do it. I want to keep doing it. So I had all these plans figured out. Like, well, if I don't get asked to come back, here's what I'm going to do. But luckily, I was able to come back. So I can't imagine, like, this is your livelihood that you guys, from any coaching change, or if a coach feels like it or whatever, like, hey, we're going to get rid of you, and like how that, like, to be able to work and think at any day I could just not be here.
And most of the college coaches are on 1-year contracts. And you can be terminated and then given 90 days or 60 days or 30 days, or it depends on how the school has the contracts written. Some of your major schools now are giving multi-year contracts, and that's how you're able to do it. But yeah, it's the stress level is off the charts.
Yeah. So how was it working with Urban Meyer?
It was unbelievable.
Yeah.
And you didn't sleep. You didn't, and it was something that I had never experienced, but it was something that I needed to experience. An absolute organizational nut.
Yeah.
You knew exactly where you stood with him. It was black or white. There was no gray area whatsoever. And his biggest motivator was fear. And he always shared that story that there's the 2 greatest motivators in life are love and fear.
Yeah.
And you got to get your players to love you, and then you've got to get them to play for you.
Yeah.
And the best way to do that is to get them to fear you. But no, it was phenomenal. And times have changed so much because at the time, cell phones were just coming in. We had 2 cell phones. Our recruiting coordinator had a cell phone, and Coach Meyer had a cell phone, and that was it. And you made recruiting calls in your office on, Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday nights, and they would pass the cell phone up and down the hall, with the defensive coordinator. This is way before the SIBO Center, and so our offices were like broom closets, and it was amazing, and it was quite the experience.
Yeah.
And there was no director of football operations. We had an assistant athletic director that handled the travel, and kind of helped oversee things. But one of the main reasons I was retained is is because of the connections I had there
Okay.
on campus and in town.
Yeah.
So I was in charge of housing. I was in charge of the food service. I was in charge of parking. I was in charge of bursar bills. I was in the police liaison, and I ran the golf outing. I ran the summer camps, and that was that was all handed to me.
Yeah.
And nowadays they have 3 or 4 people that do those things. And because there's no way the defensive line coach in today's day and age can do that stuff.
Yeah.
But it was great. The amount of people I met, the connections I made, and I think the respect that I earned from Coach Meyer was off the charts.
You mentioned summer camps, and that reminded me of I went to BG summer camp, and my favorite thing that happened there was a lot of the college coaches know some of the high school players by name because they're recruiting them, trying to get them. So my favorite thing is when I'm just a number compared to whoever I'm going against, and I'm able to beat them. Then I always felt a lot better. Like, oh, they know them because they're trying to get them, and I just beat that kid that they know.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I don't know how much stock you guys put into these camps. I mean, you're just trying to get kids in and check them out or whatever. But I always, as a high school student, I felt so good when I could beat that name kid. Yeah.
And the camps at that time were completely changing. Because it was all instructional camps at that time, and then you would try to evaluate the best you could. Mm-hmm. But and again, at the time we had the budget at Bowling Green for football was so low.
Yeah.
And so we had to run team camp. We had to get people in, number one, to offset the budget. Yeah. Number two, to offset the coaches.
Oh,
it was,
okay.
I mean, the amount of money we were making at the time is ridiculous. Yeah. And so we had to get as many players on campus as possible, and we started at team camp, and we went out and marketed to all the local schools to get them to compete, and allowed them to we had a little 7-on-7 tournament, so we'd allow the teams to compete, and it wouldn't count against their camp days. It was we really had to go, and then they changed the rule on you are now allowed to have evaluation camps. So everybody went away from the instructional camp and now became nothing but a evaluation camp.
Yeah. So. What did you like recruiting in college? Did you?
I matter of fact, I was talking to somebody. I think it was on Friday or Saturday, and I missed the contacts of the high school coaches. Okay. When I was down last weekend at the state clinic in Columbus, and just seeing those guys, that I had, for 30 years, would walk the halls of their school, with them, and I miss that. Mm-hmm. And the relationships that you have with families and players, phenomenal.
Yeah.
I went up yesterday to, we're doing that Kids Heart Challenge at Woodland this week, and I went up to the weight room at Toledo, and he lets me, Coach Bichet lets me borrow his jump pad, vertical jump tester. So one of the stations for the kids is they get to measure their vertical jump. It's kind of neat for them to see, and it's a real quick deal. So I went up yesterday morning to pick it up, and on Saturday they have open lift, which is very, very low key. Guys come in, they address specific areas, and then they have a little arm workout that they do, or it's all kinds of things.
Yeah.
And to be able, I walked in there and saw probably 10 to 12 of the players that I had recruited there my last year and two there, and were there working out and coming up and saying hi, and you miss that, and asking about their families, and them asking about my wife and my girls. You miss that, because that's what I don't get right now is I'm teaching at the elementary school level, which I love, and it's a whole nother world in itself.
Yeah.
And then I show up to the stadium every afternoon. The players on the team don't see me during the day.
Mm-hmm.
I just roll in there and yell and scream like a maniac and then leave, So that's a tough transition.
Yeah.
And which is completely different to what I've done for 30 years.
That's my favorite part about even just being a high school coach is the family part of it. Like, I like being in contact with these kids and talking to them, and then seeing them excel at other sports, and then talking to their parents there, and just like you said, I'm not even a teacher, so I'm doing my job, working for the Metro Parks, then I come in, coach, do whatever. So I try to do that extra stuff outside of football season to see, because they are like, I love going to hockey games and seeing Sam, Yonker play goalie, and going to the basketball games and all that stuff, because I agree, like the family part of it and just being more personal is my favorite part of it.
Yeah.
So you were at BG, and I'm assuming you ended up at UT because that's when Beckman went to UT. Is that how that happened, or how did you?
Yeah, and it was we were winning pretty good at Bowling Green, and then it kind of we had one season under Greg Brandon that was below 500, and then we got it back going again.
Yeah.
And Greg Brandon was the head coach there 8 years, and we were bowl eligible 7 out of the 8.
Okay.
But there was a new athletic director that got hired there, and he and Coach Brandon were polar opposites, and ended up costing Coach his job. And as a matter of fact, our last football game was at the University of Toledo, and it was Coach Amstutz's last football game, and he had already been told he wasn't going to be back, and so that program had, the players were really running the program there at the time once he announced that, hey, he's not coming back, and we beat him pretty good that night. Beat him really, really bad that night.
Yeah.
But it was funny because this is back when the Maction first really started, and this was I want to say was the Wednesday. No, I'm sorry. We played him on Friday. This was the day after Thanksgiving, and we played him that night because I was going to take the girls Christmas shopping the next day before we headed on the road recruiting on Sunday. So I get up on Saturday morning, and I'm going to go for a big run. And I did. I come back. I'm in the shower, and that's when my wife comes in and says, "Hey, Coach Brandon's on the phone." And I get out and say, "Coach, hey, what's up?" He says, "Well, I just got fired. You guys got a staff meeting in an hour, with the athletic director." I'm like, well, the night before at the game at Toledo, that big press box, it's all the walls are glass.
Yeah.
And the athletic director's booth is right next to the coach's booth. Mm-hmm. And then on the other side is the play-by-play radio. And you're in a giant aquarium. It's glass walls, in front of you and on both sides of you, and everybody can see everything that you're doing. Well, we walk in there, and nobody's in the AD's box. Nobody. And this is the Toledo Bowling Green game.
Yeah.
And nobody's in the box. And I'm like, okay. You at the time you don't think anything because you're locked in on the game. And like I said, we blew their doors off, became bowl eligible, and we were on the bus after the game, and my oldest daughter Michaela she's going to ride back with me on the bus back. That thought that was the coolest thing in the world.
Oh, for sure.
And I'm sitting there, and Coach Brandon comes on the bus. He's sitting down there. He goes, "Hey, Wardo." He goes, I just got a text message from my agent saying that the AD wants to fire me. And I'm like, I'm thinking we just beat them.
Yeah.
It was like 35-6 or something. I mean, it was crazy. And lo and behold, the agents nowadays they know anything before the coaches do.
Yeah.
It's crazy the way this is now. Well, so all of a sudden I'm in a staff meeting on Saturday, and the AD's telling us, hey, I want you guys to work, and I'm going to make sure that the new coach interviews every single one of you. We got the banquet. It's next end of the year banquet's next Friday, and this, that, and the other. Let's go out on the road recruiting, and I did. I went out on the road recruiting, and that was T.J. Fatunikin's class.
Okay, all right.
Chris Jones, who was one of the best defensive players in the history of BGSU football, was a young man I had committed out of Brownsburg, Indiana, and so I'm on the road recruiting and making phone calls and all this stuff, and it's funny because I get a phone call like on Wednesday. Matter of fact, I'm driving back from Indianapolis. I get a phone call. I don't know. It's a 419 number, and I answer it, and it's Andy Boyd, who at the time was on staff at Toledo.
Okay.
Hey, Mike, it's Andy Boyd. Yeah, Andy, what's going on? I'd seen Andy on road recruiting. I didn't, I knew him. I didn't know.
Yeah.
What are you hearing? What are you hearing down at Bowling Green? What are you hearing up here? Well, he had heard through the grapevine that Tim Beckman was going to get the Toledo job, and so he's calling me because he knows that I'm friends with Tim Beckman. Well, and the week before that, I told you we played Toledo on Friday, day after Thanksgiving. That week before, that Saturday before that, I'm sitting in the office early in the morning watching film, and Tim Beckman calls me. This is before any of this ever happens.
Yeah.
And he's at Oklahoma State at the time, and they're going to play Oklahoma that night in the Bedlam Bowl, whatever they called it. And but he's got time. He's sitting around, and he says, "Hey, what are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm sitting here watching Toledo." He goes, "How are they?" I said, "There's more talent on this team than and there was a ton of talent." He says, "Really?" He said, "Can you win there?" I said, "Yeah." So, little did I know that he was going to get the job.
Yeah.
I didn't know. Tim and I are good friends. Well, this all plays out. So, I'm on the road, and I'm good friends with the coach at Indiana State now, who was a finalist for the Miami of Ohio job. Mm-hmm. And matter of fact, he was offered the Miami of Ohio job, was on his way to the airport with his wife to fly into Oxford to accept the head coaching position. And he gets to the ticket counter, is getting ready to get his boarding pass, and the AD calls him and says, "Don't."
Oh, no.
The president has told me that I cannot hire you. We are going in a different direction. So he's with his wife, and they're at the airport within 10, 15 minutes of getting on this plane.
Yeah.
And so I thought I was going to go to Miami, Ohio. I
can't imagine what you're you're going through right now.
No, it's crazy. So I take my two girls were going to St. Aloysius School in BG, a little Catholic elementary school. So I'm taking them to work or to school, I should say, and Tim Beckman calls me. He says, "Hey, I got the Toledo job. Do you want to come?" And I said, "Of course."
Yeah.
And he said, "Well, we got to talk Matt Campbell into coming," because Matt at the time was the offensive coordinator. I was the defense coordinator at Bowling Green, so we were just getting ready to go up to Toledo. So I said, "Really?" He says, "Yeah," because he was getting ready to go to Wyoming to take a job at University of Wyoming with Coach Christensen, and he says, we got to, I need your help. We got to talk Matt into it. So, I said, sure. I look at my girls and I said, we're going to go to Toledo, and they were like, what are you saying? You're crazy. You're nuts. You're nuts. And I dropped them off, kiss them, go, and I call Matt right away. I said, hey, Matt, we got to do this. We got to, blah, 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 blah. Family, you don't want to go to Wyoming, take your family there, this, that, and we were able to convince Matt to stay. And, and that was quite a transition now. 3 years, taking over a program who, historically is really, really good, and the support there was just phenomenal. And, we got it going. And when he got the Illinois job, that was another shocker too.
Yeah.
It was like, because he had turned the job down, and they came back after him a second time, and it was when he actually accepted the job, and I wasn't going to go. I was not going to go. We had just put all this time and this effort into turning the program around at the University of Toledo. I was as happy as could be, and I wasn't going to go.
How do you feel as like your friend saying, "Hey, I'm leaving to do this"? Like, do you feel? I don't know if you feel disappointed, or do you feel like, man, we're building this thing here. Like, why?
And again, it's just the level of the program. Toledo, the best program in the Mid-American Conference, to the Big Ten is night and day.
Sure.
And Illinois at the time was one of the lowest in the Big Ten, and still it was. You just can't fathom. You can't, but that was part of the problem. Is they had won at Illinois because they had gone through some changes and some things administration wise that, but. And Coach Beckman took that job sight unseen, and it just, was it a good move at that time? No. Is it a good job now? Yeah. Because they've poured a ton of money into facilities there and to support, and you're able to get students in there. It was a mess, but, you just can't, you're talking about doing the same thing, except you're making 4 times what you're making.
Yeah.
So somebody walks in the door and says, you're making this amount, I'm going to multiply that times 4.
Yeah.
Or 5 or 6 or 7, the higher you go, and at the time, I was able to double what I'm making. Okay, you're going to do the same thing you're doing now, and we're going to double your pay.
Yeah, yeah.
And you have a chance to coach in the Big Ten.
Yeah.
And, but like I said, I was adamant. I was torn, really, 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 really torn on that. I wasn't going to go.
Yeah, going through all those changes it's that's a lot, and I know that's what all college coaches are aware of, what the job is and what it entails, and you could be done after a year. But it just seems like it's just like takes a special person to understand all that and to still like go to work every day. But you said it isn't just like I'm coaching these kids. I'm coaching these kids, but I also have this side gig where I have to sell myself and continuously do that. Otherwise, if I don't do that part of it, whenever this ends here, because it's going to end at some point, then I'm left behind everybody else.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I appreciate you coming out here today. This was awesome. I appreciate you also as a football coach, because I do enjoy talking to you just about football. Obviously, I'm an offensive coach. I don't know a lot about your defense, but I like learning things, and I like, when you explain things to me or how you do things, or even watching drills. I love coaches do certain drills and how and not even how they do the drill, but just how they talk and how they coach the kids. So I've learned a lot from you, and I appreciate you. I know my kids loved having you as their teacher. Lillian really enjoys. Coach, she just told me a couple days ago, Mr. Ward, whenever we gotta demonstrate something, he always picks me. I was like, well, you just get the short end of the stick on that because I coach with him. She's like, yeah, but it's fun, it's okay. I said, all right, so that's good.
but you know how it is. If you're going to have somebody demonstrate, you want somebody that you know and can trust, because as soon as you put somebody up there that and then they make a mockery of it, and now you spend the rest of the class trying to reel them back in. So.
Well, again, I'm Perrysburg's lucky to have you. I'm glad you're here with us, and for however long that is, I will continue to soak up any football knowledge you have. Again, thanks for coming out here on the podcast.
No problem. I've loved it.
Thanks to Coach Mike Ward for coming on the Nerdball podcast today. It was great to hear all his stops. I really enjoyed him talking about the head coaches he worked with, how he got to where the different schools, how he got to BG and UT, his connections to other coaches, who he actually coached with. That's always cool to hear all the quote unquote famous coaches you coach with, and the story about him, coaching wrestling, football, and being a teacher is pretty insane to be able to do all those things. But he was a great guest, and look for him still out there Friday nights at Perrysburg sidelines. He's a great coach to have on our staff. Thanks as always to Fort Max CrossFit for allowing me to be in their space here. This is a great recording space. It's also even greater CrossFit studio. So if you're looking for anything CrossFit for them, it's fortmaxcrossfit.com. Thanks to Cuttlefish Graphics, Real JP Multimedia, Perrysburg Junior High STEM Lab, and Big Daddy Graphics for always helping out the podcast. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.